Okay, so this talk's called Hacking Humans, Social Engineering and Techniques for How to Protect Against Them. So it's not an overly technical talk, so you can sort of relax a bit. There's no complex maths or coding involved. So loose agenda of what I'm going to go through this afternoon. So we're going to talk a bit about what social engineering actually is. Then we're going to talk about some famous social engineering cases. There's some examples. Then we're going to go through social engineering techniques and sort of a rough high-level framework which attackers go through when they try to mount an attack. And then we're going to talk about how to protect yourselves and your company against social engineers, which is the important part. And then I've got a few interesting resources which I can share with you at the end. So quick disclaimer first, I'm sure I don't need to say it, but I'll say it anyway. Social engineering generally leads to bad and illegal things, so that's the whole point of the talk isn't to teach you how to do illegal things, it's to teach you how to protect yourself from it, because you don't want to end up like this guy. So social engineering is a huge subject, so we can't do the entire thing justice in an hour. I mean, some people spend their lives studying this stuff. It's all psychology and all that good stuff. But what we're going to do is we're going to treat it as an art of the possible. So it gives you the basic groundings of what social engineering is and the steps that you go through to do it. And then, if you're interested in the subject, I've got some good resources and books at the end which you can follow up with. So first of all, let's start off with a little story, a little fireside story. So we've got a guy called Keith who's sitting there late at night working in tech support, daydreaming about his tea break where he's going to go and own his game of pool with his friend. And then suddenly he gets a phone call. So he picks it up and goes, "Hello, this is Keith from technical support. How can I help you?" Then there's a panicked voice on the end of the phone. "Keith, it's Tom, Senior Financial VP from Floor 9. I've got a big meeting tomorrow and I can't get into my system to access the PowerPoints and spreadsheets. If I can't access these systems, then I'm screwed. We've got a massive investor meeting in the morning." So Tom's like, "Okay, well, have you gone through the password reset process?" "Well, of course I've gone through it. Why do you think I'm phoning you? It keeps on locking out when I go through it." And he's starting to get quite irate and sort of upset at this point. So after a bit of toing and froing, sort of Keith decides, "Okay, well, I'll do a password reset for you now, and we'll get you back into the system. You're an executive. I don't want to piss you off." So he says to Tom, "Well, what do you want me to change your password to?" And he goes, "Oh, I'll change it to Monkey25. Made it up on the spot. So Keith does that, and then Tom tries a password, and then suddenly he's in. He's like, "Oh my God, thank you very much. Because of you, I'm now going to be able to do this meeting tomorrow. So you've just saved this massive investment meeting. Thank you." And he hangs up. So Keith's sitting there, he's very happy with himself. He's daydreaming about running down the corridor, high-fiving all his friends, because he's now just helped a senior exec on Floor 9. And, this exec now knows who Keith is. So great, he's done a bit of networking as well. So whilst Keith's doing this, Tom, who's not actually a senior VP in the company, is actually a hacker. He's copying lots of documents off the network onto a USB stick, and then he leaves the building. So a very simple example, but it's a typical type of thing that can happen in a corporate environment. And I've worked in some banks in the UK where these sorts of things have happened in technical support. Okay, so what is social engineering? So I went to my good friend Wikipedia for a definition. And it's the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest. So it's getting people to do something that's not good for them. So there's 3 different types of kind of social engineering attacks out there. So the one that we're all probably familiar with is phishing, where we get those really annoying emails from people who've either got rich relatives in some African country, or you've got an email trying to get you to log onto your bank account with a very convincing bank logon page. Second type is phishing, which is where you get people phoning you up. So the typical call center phone calls you get, I presume you get them over here, where it's a call from Microsoft supposedly, and they've detected a virus on your system, and they want to get access to your system to help you out. That's a phishing attack. And the next one is impersonation, which is where someone's taking on a persona of someone else, which is kind of what we're going to focus on in this talk. So a few stats. So there's a link at the bottom there from socialengineer.org, and they've got some pretty good stats on there. Most of them are US-based, but it kind of illustrates the point. So 90% of all email is spam. I think we all know that when we look at our inboxes every day. And phishing represents 77% of all social-based attacks. So it's still one of the most popular types of attacks out there because it's so easy to do at scale. And clicking links in emails accounted for 88% of all reported phishing. So that's like your typical, click on this link to reset your bank account password. It goes to a very convincing page which looks identical to your bank, but is actually an imposter site. So phishing, so in 2012 in the US, there's 2.4 million customers targeted for phone fraud. But then, just in the first half of 2013, it's 2.3 million customers. So you can see how it's exponentially growing in severity. And to large corporations, the average loss per account can equal around $42,500. So it can have a massive impact on companies if, like I say, a bank account gets compromised. So then impersonation, so typical types of impersonation, like medical ID theft is a very good one, where people steal your medical data and use that to build up a persona of who you are, because medical data is very private, so therefore it's generally quite trusted information. And typically the top place for ID theft is in the workplace. So your companies may spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on firewalls and intrusion protection systems, which is all well and good, and should be done, but the weakest link in your company is going to be the people working for it. And 80% of thefts involve disabling or bypassing control. So we saw that in the story at the beginning. Keith, the technical support engineer, sort of bypassed the control and did a password reset without really doing too much checking. So who makes up social engineers? So typically we have hackers. They're the ones we all know about. Penetration testers are people who are legitimately paid by companies to try and break into their systems, and they'll either do that via traditional hacking or via trying to impersonate people and extract information like passwords from people. But then you've got your typical things like spies and governments, all the sorts of things that we see in James Bond films, where the spy takes on a personality or a persona of someone else. Disgruntled employees, recruiters are very good ones, are trying to manipulate you to do something that's not necessarily in your best interest. I get about 10 of those calls a day. And salespeople, because they're trying to get you to buy something which you maybe don't need, but they're going to try and get you to buy it anyway. It's all a form of social engineering. Can anyone think of who the best type of social engineers are that's not on the list? Actors? Yeah, that's a good one. I was going to say children. Especially my daughter, she can pretty much get me to do anything, I'm sure. And there's a lot of people nodding, so it's a similar situation. So why social engineering? Well, it consistently works. People are very easy to manipulate, and as we'll see later, people generally want to be nice and be helpful, and people use that to their advantage. And as we sort of said before, people are the biggest vulnerability of any network. So if you haven't gone through any of the mitigation techniques, which we're going to talk about later, it doesn't matter how much you spend on expensive hardware to protect your networks. If someone's just going to go in and copy files off onto a USB stick and take them out of the building, then that's a problem. And also, it's a path of least resistance. So if you're trying to get passwords to access a system, you could do it the traditional way and try and do a data breach and get the password files and then brute force them. But that's a lot of work to try and extract a password. Or you can just manipulate someone and get them to tell you it. So some typical examples of social engineering attacks. So customer services, they're people on the front line of the company on the phones. All it takes is you to do 5 or so phone calls to different people, extracting different bits of information every time to help build up a larger picture, which will then allow you to go in and sort of do your main attack. Delivery staff is another big problem. I mean, if someone turns up in a brown boiler suit carrying a load of packages, generally companies tend to let them in. And if you don't escort them around the building, then you've just given someone access to the building quite easily. So generally any type of phone call where you're going to get someone on the phone is a very good way of getting information because they can't see you, so it's a very one-sided type of interaction. And as we've seen in our example, technical support is a great way of trying to get information on a system, especially if you target junior members of staff who are fresh out of college or university who aren't very experienced in these things. They're going to be very eager to help. So let's look at a few sort of famous software engineering cases just so we can see where people have done this and ultimately paid the price of going to prison. So has anyone heard of Kevin Mitnick? A very famous guy now. So he used to be quite dodgy in his younger years. So he had a high-profile arrest in 1995, and he spent 5 years in prison. And he's done loads of hacks from the 1979 onwards. So when he was 16, he broke into Dec Computers, and he was sort of pirating software off of their servers. And he's done things like riding the bus network in LA for free by hacking the payment systems. And he's, in the end, he was charged with 14 counts of fraud and 8 cases of unauthorized entry. Of course, these days, he's a reformed character, so he's now a successful security consultant, and he spends most of his time teaching companies how to protect themselves from people like him. So he's actually made a very good career off the back of it, but you know, he had to spend quite a few years in prison to do that. Those are some books that he's written. Highly recommend them. I'll show them again at the end of the presentation. The first two, so The Art of Intrusion and The Art of Deception, are probably some of the best books I've ever read on the subject. And then Ghost in the Wires is kind of his biography, so it's a fascinating read. I read them on holiday once to my wife's horror. Reading technical books on holiday. So next one is a guy called Frank Abagnale. Has anyone heard of this guy? Yeah. So he was a... Yep. Can you see my next slide? But yeah, you're right, the film Catch Me If You Can. So he was a confidence trickster and check forger and imposter. So he did all sorts of things like taking on different identities to become an airline pilot, doctors, lawyers, all that sort of thing. And he was very, very convincing. And he even managed to escape custody twice. He was quite a slippery chap as well. But as a guy at the front said here, there's a film with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks called Catch Me If You Can, which is kind of a Hollywood dramatisation of his life. It's a brilliant film if you've not seen it. There's another little sort of snippet from the film there where he's taken on the persona of an airline pilot, which is quite frightening to think that someone who's not actually a pilot is helping to fly your plane. I'll bear that in mind when I do my 30-hour journey back to the UK. So, final example I want to look at is Charles Ponzi. So everyone's probably heard of the Ponzi scheme or the pyramid scheme. And this is a mail fraud scheme using international reply coupons. So you buy the reply coupons and then you can sell them for stamps. And you generally get more money when you sell them than what it costs to buy them. So he started doing this, but then he sort of turned it into a pyramid scheme where he had lots of people investing money so that he could use that money to buy more reply coupons overseas. And he sort of carried on building up this ruse until it all eventually sort of collapsed. And then I can't quite remember how long he spent in prison, but I mean, I don't think he made it out alive. Okay, so let's look at some social engineering techniques. Let's get on to sort of the process of how it's done. So it's generally broken down into 4 stages. So we've got information gathering, pretexting, elicitation, and manipulation. So we'll go through each of those in turn. So to do a social engineering attack, it takes a lot of preparation. So you're not just going to target someone and say, right, I'm going to socially engineer you and expect to be successful at it, because you won't, you'll probably fail. So you need to gather as much information as you can from different sources. And there's various different ways of doing it, and one of the easiest ways of doing it is this, fishing through the bins, or dumpster diving as they call it. So you're literally looking for any bits of information or paper that's been thrown out at a company or someone's home. So bank statements, if you don't shred them and you just throw them away, there's a goldmine of information there. Prescriptions, for medication is very useful, so then you can find out information if they've got any particular illnesses, which you can use to your advantage. And so pretty much anything like that. I mean, another example as well is if you go through someone's bins and it's full of whiskey bottles, then you can probably guess that they've got an alcohol problem. So, getting them down the pub might be a good way to do a social engineering attack against them. This day and age, you can use lots of social networks. This is called open source intelligence, OSINT they call it, where you're using public-facing sites to try and extract information. So not everyone has their Facebook profile locked down. Some people still have a lot of information on there that's public. The same again with Twitter, so you can look at the sorts of things that people are tweeting and build up quite a good picture around someone's personality. And LinkedIn is an absolute goldmine because you generally put your entire career history on there. So you can get lots of information from that. But also just doing a good old-fashioned Google or a Bing search. I'll put that on there to balance it out, but generally Google. So another good way of stealing information is by using malware to install keyloggers on people's systems. So if you want to get someone's password, why not just record the keystrokes that they're typing in on their terminal? Another popular one as well is malware which takes regular screenshots from your system and then posts them off to a server. So if you've got confidential information on your screen, then you can have this malware just taking image dumps from the screen, compressing them and then sending them off to a server, which is why you should always run anti-malware software. Another one is shoulder surfing. again, very common. So if you sit in there and you could just look over someone's shoulder. I was on the train, so I commute to work. On the train, sort of stood up and I could see someone typing on their emails. You know, you just look over and you can see exactly what they're typing. You know, in this case, someone was writing a message to their husband. It was very easy to do. You just stood up and looked. So you have to be very aware of what you're doing. So if you're doing something that's company focused and you're on a train, just imagine, you know, the amount of people that could be looking over your shoulder and seeing what you're doing, or viewing your bank balance in a public place. You know, it's all things you need to be aware of. There are ways to help protect yourself against shoulder surfing, and these actually exist. They're called privacy scarves. When I found the photo, I was intrigued, and there is actually companies that sell these, although you'd look like a bit of an idiot using it. Good on a hot winter's day, though, in Sydney. Okay, so the next stage then is pretexting. So this is the practice of presenting oneself as someone else in order to obtain private information. So it's acting, it's taking on someone else's persona. And sort of general principles that you want to follow when you're doing pretexting. So the more planning and research you do against the persona you want to take on is going to lead to more success. So as I said, you're not just going to target someone and then go straight in for the kill, as it were. You're going to put a lot of preparation in and try and work out what your new identity is going to be. Shared interests make success more likely. So if you're a fan of Manchester United Football Club, and you know your target is as well, then that gives you a shared interest. So when you start trying to manipulate them, you can just spend a lot of time talking about shared interests to help build up a rapport with that person. So you don't necessarily go straight in for the kill. You might spend weeks building up a friendship with someone. Good acting definitely helps. So you need to look convincing when you're doing it. So it is no different to acting in a play. You are taking on kind of a real-world acting role. Another principle as well is keeping it simple. So try not to overcomplicate the persona that you're taking on, because the more complicated you make it, the easier it is going to be to fail and sort of screw up. And you want to try and use information that doesn't need any verification as well. So if you say something that the person maybe finds a bit suspect, and then they're going to go off and then try and verify that information, if you've made a mistake, then that's going to help unravel your persona. So when you're planning a pretexting at the stage, you need to define what it is you're actually trying to achieve. It goes without saying, with anything, good planning always leads to more success. And you need to plan for different reactions to stray off the happy path. So if all goes well, you're going to go in and do your pretexting attack against someone, and if it all goes well, you'll get to the result that you want. But what if it doesn't go well? What are all the different failure cases that can happen? You need to prepare for those. So if you're trying to, say, take on a persona of someone who's single, not in a relationship, and then you accidentally turn up and you've got your wedding ring on, and they notice, what would you do in that situation? And will just being friendly be sufficient? I mean, do you need to go to all the effort of taking on this big acting persona? Could just being nice to someone be all you need to do? It could be just as simple as that. So this is another sort of definition of social engineering. So it's a clever manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust. And the key word there is trust. So it's building up trust with another person. Okay, so we've talked about pretexting, which is about building up the persona of the person that you're trying to be. So the next step is elicitation, and this is the act of getting information without directly asking for it. So now if I go up to you and say, can you tell me your password? No. So you're trying to get someone to give you information without directly giving it up, or without directly asking for it. So elicitation is all about trying to exploit human nature. So most people want to be polite, not everyone, but generally most people are nice and want to be helpful. Especially at a conference like this, people are generally very nice and want to help. And people want to appear well informed as well. So nobody wants to be the guy or the girl who doesn't know the answer to something, because it makes you look a bit stupid. So if you ask the right questions, and it makes people feel like they're being informed and being the person with all the knowledge, and people might generally be a bit more loose-lipped and sort of tell you stuff that they're not supposed to, just to make themselves look and feel better. And people want to be appreciated as well. So if you're, as part of your persona, if you're being very nice and appreciative, thanking them, maybe buy them a drink for helping you out with something, people like to be appreciated, a bit of a pat on the back. And generally, honest people don't like to withhold information or lie. So if you're a good, honest person, then lying isn't in your nature. So you're going to be very truthful in the information that you give up. So the best way to succeed at this then is really understanding how to communicate with people. So this is why I say it's very easy for us to talk about it now for an hour, but actually some of this stuff can take years and years to master because it's all about human psychology. And you need to be able to adapt communications to fit a situation. So it's a bit like what we were saying before about trying to cater for the failure paths in your pretexting. You need to change your communication style to fit the situation. So if someone starts getting a bit aggressive towards you because you're going in too strong, you need to be able to adapt your style of communication to dial it back a bit. And you want to build a bond with your target. As I say, you're not just going to go straight in directly and try and get the information out of someone. You might spend a long period of time befriending them. So you might meet them down the pub, build up a friendship over several weeks or months, and then you try and get the information that you want. So you don't so you don't arouse any suspicion. And obviously this goes without saying that whenever you're with that person, you have to stay in character. So if you go out of character, or they see you going out of character when you're on the phone, or if they see you around locally, then that's not going to help you. And also, you need to know how to use effective questioning techniques. So we'll look at some of these now. So 4 main questioning techniques that are out there. So we've got neutral, open, closed, and leading. So a neutral question doesn't directly target the person on how to answer the question. So you're not leading or directing in any way. So if you say, how do you like the weather today? That kind of invites you to say as much as you want. Then you've got open-ended questions, which encourages a full, meaningful answer using the subject's own knowledge. So tell me about the relationship with your father. It's a very open question. You can go into as much detail as you want. Or how do you feel about the election candidates? It gives you the opportunity to be a lot more open in how you answer the question. But then on the flip side of that, we have closed questions. So, do you get on with your father? Yes. Or no. It doesn't really invite you to say much more because it's very directed in how it's being asked. And who are you going to vote for? Trump or Hillary, in case of the American election. It doesn't really invite you to say much more. And then we've got leading questions. So these are more open in nature, but you're trying to lead the person down a particular way of answering the question. So the example on the screen there, so do you have any problems with your boss? It's kind of implying that you might have some problems with your boss, and then that might kind of coerce your answer a little bit. Or how fast was the red car going when it smashed into the blue car? So you're kind of putting the idea into the person's head that it was actually the red car that was going fast and it was at fault. But it might not have been, but you're trying to lead them into a particular way of answering. So normally when you're doing this, then you want to try and funnel the questions. So you'll start off very neutral, and then you'll go into a more open style. Then as you start to get towards the information that you're trying to get from the subject, you'll then start going a lot more closed. And if necessary, you'll use more directed questions. So you think of it as a funnel. Okay, so we've covered pretexting and elicitation. So pretexting is taking on a persona, and elicitation is using that persona to extract information. But what's the difference between manipulation and influencing? So there's very subtle differences between them. So influencing is about getting someone to change their mind in a way that is good for them. So in the case of the party last night, if you're considering having that third whiskey and your friend says, oh, I don't think you should do that because you're supposed to be up early, you've got to talk at 9 o'clock. They're trying to influence you in a way that's good for you by helping you. Whereas manipulation is influencing someone to change their mind in a way that is not good for them. So in the case of the story at the beginning, the person who was calling the technical support line was directly trying to manipulate the person on the phone. So it wasn't a way that was good for them, it was very bad for them in the end. So influencing generally ends up in a win-win situation. So it's a win for you and it's a win for the person that you're influencing. Whereas manipulation is generally a win-lose scenario. It goes without saying that manipulation is generally bad, but for social engineering, it's good. It's kind of the whole point of it is you're trying to manipulate someone. So if we go back to our original definition from the beginning of the talk, where we said it's an act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest, actually we're talking about manipulation. Okay, so what are some typical manipulation techniques? So fear is a typical technique, or what's called the fear then relief technique. So you make someone scared about something and then you offer them instant relief to take that fear away. So example here, so hi, this is technical support. We've detected a virus on your machine and it's going to lock all your files. Oh shit, I'm going to lose all my files. So fear starts to set in. We need to install a virus killer, but if you give us the password to your machine, we'll log on and we'll put the virus checker on there and everything could be good. So that's the relief. So you get the person into a sort of heightened state of fear and then you offer immediate relief so that they trust you. Guilt is another way. You use guilt as a way of making someone comply. So you do someone a favour and then you use it against them later. So blackmail is a very typical technique here. So example, I need you to copy these files for me. You owe me a favour after I kept X a secret for you earlier. You know, it's guilt tripping someone into doing something for you. Another technique, so the foot in the door technique. So asking the victim to do a very small request first gets the foot in the door. Then once they comply, you can then follow on and get more information out of them. So a very common technique used by salespeople. So if you get door-to-door salesmen at your door, they might ask you a question like, you know, how's the weather? You know, you give them a response. But by getting that positive response from that person in the first place, it actually makes it a lot easier for them to then start up a conversation with you. So one here, you know, can you tell me the time? Can you spare some change? Typical like questions that you use to lead in with someone. So those are the main stages that you go through for mounting a social engineering attack. I say it's quite a high level framework. You can spend a lot of time going into the psychological intricacies of it. But what we really want to know is how can we protect ourselves from this? So we're going to go through some techniques that we can use for personal mitigation for yourselves, but then also what you want your companies to be doing. So if your companies aren't doing any of these things, then maybe you can go back to your offices next week and try and get them to change. So as we said then, common targets in a company tend to be junior staff because they're very eager to please and help. Contractors are also very common people to be targeted because they don't have the same sort of vested interest in the company as what a full-time member of staff does. And I've worked with various companies before, or contractors that are from outsourcing operations as well, where culturally, from the countries they're from, they're very eager to try and help because they don't want to be seen as evasive or not helpful. So they're very good people to target. Admin staff as well and support staff, again, people that are probably more junior in the company. So if you go in pretending to be an executive and you're trying to get information out of them, they're going to want to help. So they're very easy to try and target. Whereas if you try and go against someone who's higher up in a company, they're probably going to be a bit more savvy and not as easily manipulatable. So if you've got someone phoning you up or turning up at the office, the best thing to do to start with is ask them for ID. Very simple. Can you show me your ID? You know, if a guy turns up wearing a brown boiler suit carrying a load of parcels, you know, are you just going to let him in, or are you going to check his credentials first? Is he from DHL? Is he from Bob's Delivery Service? You know, you need to check. And watching for any out of character questions as well. So again, going back to the delivery man example, if he turns up and then he starts asking about where the server room is, or things that are very out of character for a delivery man, then that should be an immediate red flag. Again, a lot of these are kind of common sense, which you'd be glad to know. So don't let guests roam free in a building. So again, delivery man, if he turns up and he has to personally deliver a parcel to someone, and you've checked his credentials and you think they're okay, then go with him, make sure he's escorted, or get someone else to escort him. Don't just let them sort of wander off around the building. This one, again, should be obvious, especially to us technical folk, but it isn't obvious to everyone. Don't plug in thumb drives that you find lying on the floor. So, you know, a very common scenario is you might see a 16 gig thumb drive on the floor. You'll pick it up and think, oh, 16 gig, that's quite a good one. You know, because they're not cheap. Then you might go and plug it into your laptop, and then that could be where keyloggers get installed or worse. So when you're out and about out of the organisation, just be aware of what you're saying. So, you know, pubs and bars are very bad for this. Once you've had a few drinks and you're out with your colleagues, you tend to start being a bit looser with the the type of conversation you're having. So you might start talking about projects you're working on at the company, or you might start taking the piss out of your boss. I'm sure everyone's really professional and doesn't actually do that, but you never know who's around you listening. You know, all it needs is someone who's deliberately targeting your company to be sitting on the next table, listening in. They don't have to do anything. You're just giving them loads of information to help them build up their pretext. So shredding documents is very important. So when you finish with your bank statements at home, don't just sling them in the bin. You know, buy one of those small portable shredders and shred them first. Because then if anyone is going through your rubbish trying to find the information, you've just made their life instantly harder by shredding everything. So prescriptions, bank statements, letters, anything. Again, going back to thumb drives, but don't store really important sensitive documents on thumb drives because they're very easy to lose. You know, they fall out of your pocket or you leave them on a train. Or if you do have to use thumb drives to store documents, make sure they're encrypted with a strong password. Don't write the password on the side of the USB thumb drive. I've seen someone do that before. It's hilarious. So if you're using company laptops, they should all have drive encryption on them. You know, laptops are very easy to steal. Probably not as easy to lose, but people do lose them. But you know, if someone steals your laptop, make sure you've got encryption on it. You know, Macs, for example, come with encrypted drives by default. I think Windows 10 does now, does it? Or do you have to enable it? I've not used Windows for a while. But make sure you're using some kind of full disk encryption. Larger corporations generally mandate this as well, especially in regulated environments, that you have full disk encryption. Again, be aware of who's looking over your shoulder. You know, you could be sitting on the train or the bus working on some documents for work that you need to get done for tomorrow, but do you know who's sitting behind you and looking at your screen or sitting next to you? You know, if you've got important sales figures or source code or anything on your screen, you think you're being good by working on the train, but actually anyone could be looking at what you're doing. And the final one for personal mitigation techniques then is educate yourself. You know, by going to talks like this, reading some of the book resources I'm going to put up at the end. It's, you know, there's lots of really good stuff on YouTube as well about social engineering, which is very insightful. And as well as resources like Pluralsight, you know, there's courses on there as well. Okay, so we talked about kind of personal mitigation techniques. So what about corporate mitigation? So what should companies be doing? So one thing that companies should do is start identifying what information assets are most valuable and then marking them accordingly. So what do we mean by this? So we mean using information coding. So if you've got documents that are marked with green, OK for a release, then you kind of know that they're OK to be in the public domain, and that's OK. Then you could have amber, release only with authorization. You know, if you have that on the front cover, it's an immediate flag that, OK, I can't really go sending this document off unless I get permission from someone higher up in the company. Right the way down to red, which is confidential, do not release. You know, it's a very sensitive commercial documents which should never leave the building. But just by doing a very simple thing, by information coding all of your documents on the front page, it just becomes very obvious what you can and can't do with those documents. So if your company doesn't have this, I mean, generally large companies do have corporate security policies. But if you're in a smaller company that doesn't, it's a good idea to get them written. I mean, they're not the most interesting of documents, granted, but it is important to have them. And a good place to start is actually on this website here. So sans.org has a load of open source templates which you can use to kickstart your own security policy documents. But once you've written them, obviously, if you just have 10 or 20 documents, you can't really expect your staff to sit down and read them all because they won't. So you need to follow that up with suitable training as well. So I don't know how it works in Australia, but in the UK, when you have regulated financial companies, you have to have training plans in place annually to take people through all the key highlights of the security policies. So it's important to have these written down, because if you do have to dismiss someone for breaking the security policy, you've then got that document that you can refer back to. So as an organisation, you should be keeping your software regularly patched and updated. It goes without saying, we're all technical in this room. It's very important. But if you don't do this, then it leads to exploits and vulnerabilities being launched against your network. So if everyone has heard about the WannaCry virus that went around not so long ago. It caused absolute chaos in the UK, especially around our National Health Service, because they hadn't patched all of their machines, so they were still running Windows XP and old copies of Windows XP that weren't patched up to the latest version. So it made it very easy for that exploit to get passed around. So going back to document shredding, if you're in a larger company, then hiring in one of those document shredding services is very useful. You know, where you get the confidential waste boxes. Anything you finish with, just put them in there if it's paper, and then they get professionally shredded and disposed of. Companies are, where we're talking about dumpster diving, companies are a good target for people going through the bins, just because it's an absolute goldmine of information. If you've got 100 members of staff and they're all throwing stuff in the bins, just imagine what information you're going to find. So this one then, so never assume that your company is too small to be a target. If your company is quite small, the chances are you're more likely to be a target because you'll be easier to infiltrate. So never go on the assumption that this isn't going to happen to you, because it probably will. Okay, so I said this talk would be nice and easy. So we've covered most of it. So in summary then, so social engineering is the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interests. You're trying to get people to do something that's not good. And you're using lots of manipulation techniques to try and do that. We talked about the different types of social engineers that are out there, ranging from your more typical hackers, your legitimate penetration testers, through to all these different types of people, including recruiters. They're one of my hated ones. So why social engineering? Again, it consistently works. It's very easy to do. It's generally easier to try and get information out of someone than it is to try and break into their network. People are the biggest risk in your company. So as we said before, you could be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on firewalls and intrusion detection systems, but all of that, which is good. You shouldn't stop doing that. But your people in your organization are still your weakest link. So having good training about how to mitigate social engineering is very valuable because it stops those people doing something stupid. And again, it's the path to least resistance. So if you can get someone to give up a password, it's generally a lot easier than trying to score yourself a data breach and then trying to hack all of the passwords or brute force all of the passwords. So we went through the 4 stages of social engineering. So information gathering, pretexting, which is about taking on a persona to convince someone that you're someone else. Elicitation, which is then using that persona as a way of getting information from people without directly asking for it. And then we looked at some different manipulation techniques that you can use, like the fear and relief technique, the foot in the door technique. There's many, many more, so we've just covered some of the common ones. And then we followed up with some personal and corporate mitigation. And as we've seen, a lot of them are actually kind of very obvious common sense things that you need to do, like asking for ID for any visitors who come in the building. Don't let people roam around free in the building. Shredding documents, not just throwing them in the bin. So they're all very common sense, but they're very, very important. Okay, so some resources which you might want to read if you're interested in this subject. So we've got the 3 Kevin Mitnick books, which I highlighted at the beginning. So Art of Deception and The Art of Intrusion. Both absolutely fantastic reads. You'll find them difficult to put down when you start reading them. And then there's Ghost in the Wires, which is Kevin's biography. Again, it's a fascinating read, just looking at some of the things he got up to. This book here is kind of considered the Bible of social engineering, The Art of Human Hacking. It's not an easy read. It's about 800 pages long, but the amount of detail that book goes into is absolutely fascinating if you want to go further. This one here, What Everybody is Saying, by Joe Navarro. He's an ex-FBI interrogator, and it's all about how to read people's body language to tell if they're lying. It's a fantastic book. So if you're talking to someone and they're sitting there rubbing their hands, for example, a lot, that's kind of a sign that they're nervous, or if they're sitting there steepling with their hands like that, that's a sign of confidence. And he goes through lots of these different techniques which I've used in interrogations against murderers to try and work out if they're lying or not. So fascinating. Okay, so that's it. So thank you for coming along. My name's Stephen Haunts. I'm the co-founder and CTO of a small payments company in the UK called LadderPay. And I'm also an author on Pluralsight. So I've got a course coming out soon which kind of covers the same subject as what we've been talking about today. That's due out sometime in September. And I'm a regular speaker at a lot of these events, so I've done the vast majority of the NDC events now, and I've sort of spoken in Belgium and Poland and other sorts of countries like that. And I also run a .NET user group back in the UK called Derbyshire.net. So if anyone happens to want to travel 10,500 miles to the UK and then get a 4-hour train up to the centre of the UK, then feel free to come along on the last Thursday of every month to my user group. You'll be welcome. I'll also buy you a beer for going to that level of effort as well. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope I've not made you too paranoid. And you can now go and get a coffee. Thank you.